Hi, my name is David. I'm 36 years old and I own a small construction business in a suburb outside of a mid-sized city. My wife Sarah works in HR for a large food company in the city. We've been married for 2 years, living in a rented two-story house. Not rich, but comfortable enough. Life went on like that until one evening 3 months ago. That Friday night, I was into the garage tinkering with my vintage motorcycle, an old Harley I'd saved up for a long time to buy and restore. Sarah and her close friend Jessica were in the backyard sipping a few beers and sharing some grilled jerky, chatting away. They often hung out like that every weekend. I was used to it, but that day while tightening a bolt, I heard my name mentioned. That David is such a fool working overtime, like crazy saving every dollar for this so-called baby fund. Little does he know he's raising another man's kid. I froze. Jessica burst out laughing. Sarah, you're so cold. What about Michael? Does he know? Of course, Michael even helped me track my ovulation to make sure it worked. The wrench slipped from my hand. Michael, Sarah's colleague, that guy who always wore a sharp suit at company parties, who had brought his wife and kids to our house for the Christmas party. Right then, I didn't go out and confront them. I quietly grabbed my phone, turned on the recorder, and let them continue to reveal everything. 15 minutes later, they had a recording full of lies, their secret lunchtime meetings at the coffee shop, their plans to deceive me, and the firm assertion, David will never know he's so trusting. That night, I kept a normal face. I kissed my wife, asked about her workday, and we watched an old movie on TV together. But inside, I had started counting down. I re-examined all the signs I had ignored: the sudden change in her phone password, the unscheduled yoga nights, the lunch bills from places Sarah had never mentioned. I ordered a home paternity test kit online, not because I suspected a child yet, but to be prepared. I took screenshots of bank statements, tracked Sarah's schedule, and saved license plate numbers of cars she appeared in at places she shouldn't have been. I was no longer the gentle husband. I was someone plotting the most ruthless and intelligent retreat of my life. Then that day came. Sarah rushed in holding 2 pregnancy tests with a bright smile, tears welling up, chattering about baby names, painting the nursery, buying a crib. I hugged her tightly, whispering, I'm so happy. And in her eyes, I saw a fleeting flicker. Guilt or smugness. That night, while she slept soundly, I sat in the garage, cracked open a beer, and started planning the end of everything. But not with fists, but with evidence. I had hired my own lawyer, paid in cash, separated all accounts, moved important documents to a safe place. Step by step, one by one, Sarah was still inside the house, giggling with her barely showing belly, unaware that I knew everything, and she was about to lose everything, everything she thought she would gain from me. From the moment Sarah announced her pregnancy, I began to perfectly play the role of the overjoyed husband. Every morning I kissed her forehead before leaving for work, and every evening I would rub her belly and ask how she was feeling. I knew she suspected nothing because the better actor was me. In the darkness, I continued to gather evidence. I installed a voice recording app on an old phone and left it on the shoe rack near the door, where Sarah often made calls when she thought I wasn't home. I photographed the suspicious messages that flashed across her screen when she fell asleep and saved records of unusual spending at coffee shops and restaurants I had never heard of. One time I pretended to forget something and returned home earlier than usual. Sarah wasn't home, contrary to what she had said. I went to the parking lot of the yoga studio, and as expected, her car was there. But instead of workout clothes, she was sitting in a familiar car. Michael's car. I didn't approach them. I just quietly took photos from a distance, then turned and left. Anger was useless at that moment. I needed timing and solid proof. I sought out my lawyer, Mr. Miller, who had helped me with a property dispute. Before Miller looked at the pile of documents I brought, was silent for a moment, then nodded. If you follow the proper procedure, she won't get anything from you. I opened a new bank account, transferring small amounts of money into it. I rented a small apartment in a neighboring town, paid 3 months security deposit, and slowly moved my belongings in. Valuables, photos of my parents. Everything that was truly mine. I still went to work, still came home on time, still talked to Sarah about names. If it was a girl, Mia, or if it was a boy, Ethan. She was excited, unaware that every word she spoke was being recorded, every expression analyzed. I started scheduling separate meetings with Sarah's parents. I called her father, Mr. Johnson, and asked to meet for coffee, saying I needed some advice. I showed him a copy of the paternity test results, the ones I had just received. Negative, the child wasn't mine. Mr. Johnson sat there stunned. He just repeated one sentence. "Oh my God, Sarah." I didn't blame anyone. I didn't cry. I just said, I don't need anyone to take my side. I just hope you won't help Sarah continue to do wrong. My plan was almost complete. Only one final step remained, revealing the truth. And I knew that moment was approaching faster than ever. That Sunday, my paternal family held a small party at a restaurant to celebrate my father's 70th birthday. Sarah had been busy since morning, choosing a dress, putting on makeup, careful as if she wanted everything to be perfect. Little did she know that today would be the turning point for everything. I arrived at the restaurant half an hour before her, a USB drive in my shirt pocket. It contained all the evidence: voice recordings, photos, messages, paternity test results. I had also prepared a printed copy placed in a sealed envelope and sent it to my lawyer with instructions. If I don't call within 48 hours, send this directly to the court. The party began in a warm atmosphere with the clinking of glasses and lively congratulatory hugs. Sarah sat beside me, her hand on her belly, her eyes filled with fake happiness. I still smiled, still chatted, but inside my heart was like a simmering volcano waiting to erupt. Just as everyone started serving the seafood boil, my aunt sitting next to Sarah turned to her and asked, "So when are you two going to give us a grandbaby to hold?" Everyone laughed. Sarah blushed and replied, "Well, we have some exciting news," I gently added. "Yeah, it's just that my health has been a bit off lately, and the doctor gave me some rather surprising results." Sarah froze. I clearly saw a flash of alertness in her eyes. She quickly forced a laugh, trying to brush it off, but I knew the game had begun. While Sarah went to the restroom, I quietly went outside to call my cousin Lisa, who was also a close friend of Jennifer, Michael's wife. I had asked her for a favor beforehand. As soon as Sarah returned, Michael also arrived hand in hand with Jennifer as usual. But this time, Jennifer's eyes were ice cold. "Michael," Jennifer said clearly across the table, "do you have anything you'd like to explain to me about your lunch dates with Sarah every Tuesday?" The whole table went silent. Sarah stood up abruptly, her face pale. I remained seated, looking at her. Then I took out my phone and played the recording of Sarah and Jessica discussing the baby fund. Her laughter echoed clearly in the deathly quiet space. No one said anything. My father put his fork down on the table slowly. "What on earth do you two think you're in?" I stood up, bowed my head to both families. "I apologize for doing this during a happy occasion, but I can't let our parents continue to be deceived." I walked out of this party, leaving behind whispers, bewildered stares, and a life about to take a different turn. That night, Sarah pounded on the door of my new apartment, a place she had never set foot in. She cried, screamed, saying I was destroying everything. I simply replied, "No, you destroyed it. I'm just the one bringing the truth to light." I didn't open the door. Behind the cold steel door, Sarah's frantic cries echoed like a broken record. Lost, painful, but also full of pretense. The security camera in the hallway recorded the entire scene, another piece of evidence for the file I had sent to my lawyer. She screamed accusations that I was heartless, that I was embarrassing her, that I was ruining her life. But in all of it, I didn't hear a single apology. Michael had disappeared from his house that day. Jennifer, his wife, texted me her thanks with a simple sentence: "I will never forget the way you chose to bring everything to light." Both families began to drift apart. Sarah's mother called me crying for almost 10 minutes, saying she couldn't believe her daughter would do such a thing. Her father, on the other hand, was silent. Not a word of blame, not a word of defense, just a text message: "David, I'm ashamed of her. You did the right thing." I spent the next few days rearranging my life. The small apartment now had a bonsai tree on the balcony, a new bookshelf, and a ceramic tea set I bought from a local market. In the evenings, I would often sit there listening to the distant sound of cars on the street, sipping hot tea, and rereading old journal entries. Words written by the very hands that had once thought of giving up on everything. Sarah was fired from her company after the HR department received an anonymous email with evidence of her taking advantage of work hours to meet with Michael. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth always finds its own way. One day I happened to run into Sarah at the grocery store. She had lost a lot of weight. Her eyes were dark and she was holding a bag of instant noodles and a bottle of dish soap. Seeing me, she froze, her eyes a mixture of resentment and shame. I just nodded slightly and walked away. No words, no need for words. I had walked through the aftermath. I didn't win and I didn't lose. I just survived and lived authentically. I knew there would be many more times I would face the feeling of emptiness and doubt, but I also knew that the one thing I must never lose was respect for myself. The first month after the upheaval passed like a long silence. I woke up without the hurried alarm, without the fake breakfast with the person I used to call my wife. I began to learn to live again from the smallest things, cooking for myself, tending the bonsai on the balcony, and cleaning every corner of the apartment as if it were a healing ritual. I signed up for a painting class every Wednesday evening, not because I wanted to become an artist, but because I needed something to stop my mind from dwelling on the past. Holding the brush in my hand, making the first clumsy strokes, I suddenly realized I had forgotten the feeling of doing something just for myself for a very long time. Every weekend, I would ride my motorcycle down to the coast, or sometimes just sit on the waterfront near the bridge with a to-go coffee and an old book. Not to escape, but to remind myself that true peace is not far away. But in allowing ourselves to stop, I started writing. Not lamenting words, but small notes, whether it was sunny or rainy, what I ate, if anything made me laugh. Recording to remember that even just a little I was still living. And living better than the day before. The biggest surprise came one morning in mid-March. I received an email from someone named Lauren, an editor at a small local newspaper. She had happened to read an anonymous excerpt from my online journal and asked if I would write a series of articles on the topic of recovering from family trauma. I didn't think I was capable. But then, I agreed. Lauren didn't know. But that invitation was the string that pulled me out of the darkness. Every line I wrote was a wound stitched up with honesty. I didn't tell my story to accuse anyone, but to remind myself. I had survived, and now it was time to move on. That evening, I hung a photo of a sunset at the beach on the wall, a place I had visited on one of my most despondent days. That photo was now a symbol of a new beginning, quiet but full of strength. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer being led by the past. I was walking without needing anyone to guide me, without needing anyone to point the way. And that was enough. The rainy season came earlier than usual that year. The long, wet afternoons stretched out rain rolling down the window panes of the small apartment where I lived alone. But this time, I no longer felt lonely. The silence was no longer confinement, but a choice. I continued to write for the small column in the newspaper. Articles with the honest perspective of someone who had gone through a breakdown. Those words received feedback shares and empathy from readers. I began to receive letters from strangers. Some had been in similar situations. Others simply needed a calm voice amidst a stormy life. One afternoon, Lauren asked me to meet for coffee. She said, "Have you ever thought about publishing a book?" I laughed and shook my head, but she looked at me seriously. "Your story isn't just about betrayal. It's a journey of survival, recovery, and rebirth." I didn't answer immediately. But when I got home, I sat down, opened my laptop, and started writing the first lines of a book I hadn't intended to write. Maybe I wouldn't publish it, but I wanted to preserve it. Not to revisit the pain, but to remember the journey I had overcome. I hadn't fallen in love again, and I wasn't in a hurry. Love, if it came, would be someone who looked at me not with pity, but with respect. Because I had fallen and had picked myself up. I had learned one thing. Forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for yourself. Forgiving the times I was too naive, trusted too quickly, endured for too long. And after forgiveness, there is freedom. I was no longer angry with Sarah. She had chosen her own path and had to pay the price. I didn't care where she was now or how she was living. I only knew my life from now on would be written by me. If you've listened this far, thank you for walking with me through a story that isn't just about betrayal, but about the strength of recovery. There are pains that come to remind us that not everyone deserves our kindness and sacrifice, but it is also from those losses that we learn to love again, in a more conscious, resilient, and worthy way. If you have ever been in a similar situation, remember, you are not alone. Choose to stand by yourself, even if it means standing alone. Because in the end, peace doesn't come from holding on to someone, but when you no longer have to pretend to be okay in your own home. Leave a comment if you see a part of your own story in mine. And if you want to continue to follow emotional, real, and deeply touching stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.